they are working in several countries in Latin America and in Africa also. But the way they appeared on the international development scene here in Canada is quite interesting in a sense. You remember that during the Harper era, between 2006 and 2015, a lot of NGOs, groups that were related to international cooperation, they saw their funding cut for ideological reasons, especially those who were a bit more critical of the Canadian position towards like the extractive sector. And that's something interesting. They managed to receive funding and political support for their work. They were already operating in two countries in Latin America where there were some important human rights violations, Colombia, Haiti, and then they started working in Guatemala in 2009. They were putting forward strategic human rights litigation. So they were working on emblematic cases which could change the jurisprudence to produce a social improvement in terms of human rights, human dignity. So they were working with some partners in all of these countries. For example, in Colombia, they were involved with all of the falsos positivos. They're working also on the former Directory of Intelligence and Security of Colombia. I'm forgetting the acronym, but like the security intelligence apparatus, especially during the time of Uribe. So they were working on some really heavy cases. And in Guatemala, they got involved in what was going to the genocide case. So what struck me as something really interesting is that, like I mentioned earlier, if I combine Guatemala and Colombia, let's say, what are the most vulnerable groups in both of those countries that have been affected either by the armed conflict and the extractive presence of Canadian enterprises? Well, indigenous, women, peasants, Afro-descendants, if I combine both. But at the same time, they are the same ones who benefit from Canadian aid and some project of strategic human rights litigation that is run by this NGO, Lawyers Without Borders Canada, in Colombia and in Guatemala. So then again, I believe we need to be to see the shades. Obviously, there's something that needs to be put forward. They're working on emblematic cases that are linked mostly to the armed conflict. They're not working in cases that directly confronts mining companies. So we need to be. So that is something that also needs to be taken. So there's all this political aspect and interpretation of human rights policies. I'm from Pol Sci, so for me, like human rights, it's not something that's neutral. So it's a whole battlefield in which like different actors have different interests regarding that. So, but I believe this example shows some perhaps positive aspect in a sense, because you cannot take away dignity and injustice for people who, for historical reasons, were victimized. And when you go in emblematic cases, sometimes it's a sweet victory, but in another sense, we can clearly see that there are some cases in which they could get involved, but they're not, because it hurts some of our material interests, and especially in the extractive sector.